So now that Steve has taken some time to detail the render description file that will be read in by the render script, it's time to begin focusing on the creation of the render script. Now, anytime you set out to create a script, you obviously need to know what it is that you're going to script or what program you're going to be writing. To sit down behind a blank screen and just start randomly throwing down a bunch of commands in a particular scripting language will get you nowhere. So in this case, before we start writing any of the script, it would be fantastic if we had a very clear understanding of what the script needs to do. Now, in the last video, Steve took a lot of time to explain how we've generated some of our own commands, and the script needs to go through and read these commands and then take a look at what arguments have been assigned to the commands. And of course, there are still some special commands that do not take arguments. But it would be nice if we were to manually go through this and read it ourselves and demonstrate how the script is going to handle this information, but instead of a script doing it, let's let a human do it. So the human can say, okay, render node. So we'll make sure that there's a mantra 1 set up. Camera. Well, we know that we're going to need to go over to our mantra node and make sure that we're using this particular camera. Start, again, back over to the mantra node, adjust this information, adjust. I want you guys to see where all of this information is being set up, and what Steve is going to do is more or less act like the script, okay? So by the end of this video, you should have a very clear picture of what the script will do, as you've seen it in action, but you've seen it in action through the eyes of a human, and then in the next video we'll begin gearing up for the scripting process. So with that, Steve, I shall hand this over to you. You shall now act as my script. I have executed it. Fantastic. The only thing that must be in place first is you need to have this mantra node down.
Yep, so let's jump over to Houdini and ensure that before we truly run our script, we have this mantra node created, and this mantra node is named mantra1, since that's what the person who's written this description file has said our mantra node is going to be named.
Exactly. Now, Steve, execute script.
Okay, so I'm coming through and I'm going to read in our description file, and I'm going to read it in line by line. So I hit this line, render node is equal to /out /mantra1. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take note that this is the render node I'm dealing with. I'm going to keep that in my head. We're dealing with the mantra1 render node in /out, and I'm going to keep this in my mind, and whenever I think that I need to change settings on any render node, this is the render node I'm going to change settings on, because I've been instructed by that description file that this is our render node.
Meaning that this is the node that will be rendered at the very end.
Exactly, so when we come to render, we are going to execute render on this render node.
Excellent.
So let's jump back in. So I'm happy with that line. I've executed that line, and we jump down to the next line. Camera equals /obj /shot1. Well, I know that camera is a command telling me to modify this render node, and we're going to modify it to set it to our shot1 camera. So I'm going to jump over, and I'm going to say, okay, I need to set our camera parameter on the render node. I need to change this from whatever it was set to originally to whatever has been specified in that description file. So what I've done is I've gone in and I've taken this argument here, /obj /shot1. I've effectively copied that argument and then pasted that into this parameter in here. So I've set the parameter on the specified render node to the argument for our camera command that we've created in that description file. Coming down, we've got start that we've hit. So start has been told to equal a value of 1. So we can come over, and the script's going to know that if we're setting a start and end frame, the first thing it needs to do is change this over to render a frame range. And once it's done that, it can then set this start frame to whatever that start value was. And it's going to set that to a value of 1. We'll then come in and we'll hit the end command, and we'll see that it's 220. Now the script isn't going to mind if end comes before start or start comes before end, so the script again will go ahead and change this to render frame range, in this case having no effect. And then we're going to come in and we're going to set our end frame to be whatever we specified with the end command, so to 220. We're then going to come down and we're going to see file base, and that's equal to C/projects TD volume2 renders. We can't work with this just yet because we don't have everything to build our file name. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remember this. I'm going to keep this in my head under something that I'm going to be able to refer back to. And the same with shot name. We don't have all the pieces yet to create our file name. So I'm going to remember file base. I'm going to remember shot name. So they're now in the back of my head, and we move on with the script. So we're going to jump down. We're going to hit the new render command. So now I know, okay, we're dealing with setting up a new render. And we come down and execute the next line, and we're like, objects. Objects is equal to stadium import. So I'm going to come over and I'm going to change yet another parameter on this render node. We're going to change the candidate objects parameter to be stadium import. So we're going to take the argument for the objects command and we're going to enter that into this candidate objects parameter of our render node. Jumping down, oname. So this is our nickname for this object. It's something else I need to remember because right now we're not quite ready to build that file name, so I need to remember this in my head. Lights. Lights is set to bleachers top, so we can come down to the candidate lights and we can replace this with bleachers top. So we've taken this argument for our lights command and we've entered that into the candidate lights parameter. Jumping down another line, name. So this is a nickname for our light. And I'm going to remember that that's equal to bleachers top. So we actually have all the components now to build our file name, but we're going to continue because we haven't yet finished setting up our render. So we're going to drop down and we're going to see, pass, and pass is set to diffuse. So when we see that pass is set to diffuse, we're going to remember that we want to render a diffuse pass. And we're going to come down and now we've hit new render. So now that we've hit new render, we're ready to actually render this out. Now, in actuality, the script's going to work slightly differently, but for this example of running through the script, I'm going to leave it that when we hit new render, we render out our previous render, and I'll explain when we actually create the script how it's going to work slightly differently. But in practice, it's the same. So we hit new render, so we know we're now done setting up this render. So what are we going to do? Well, the first thing we need to do is we can construct that file name. So I'm going to construct the file name based on all the information that I have been told already. So we're going to take our file base and we're going to put that first. So let's construct our file name to C /projects /td vol2 /renders. We're then going to append to the end of that our shot name. So we're going to create /shot01 and then append onto that our file name, which is going to take our name, so stadium. And that's going to be the next folder because we had the base, the shot, then our object in a folder, and now we're actually dealing with our file name. Again, it's going to take name, so stadium underscore name, so underscore bleachers top, underscore the pass that we specified, so underscore diffuse dot $f3 dot, as I run out of space, dot pick. So we've now constructed our file name, and once we've constructed that file name, we can jump back over to that render node, and we can come up and specify the output picture to be that file name. So as I try and recall what that was set to, that would have been C /projects /td underscore volume underscore 2 /renders /shot01 /stadium underscore bleachers top underscore diffuse dot $f3 dot pick. So it will take that constructed file name and directory structure and it will enter it into this parameter. It's actually going to take an extra step and it's going to call on some operating system functionality to make sure we actually create these folders before we render, because if we specify folders that don't exist and tell Mantra to render, it will error out. So we're going to take use of some of the operating system functionality that comes built in with Python. We're going to go ahead and create all of these directories first, then we're going to set this parameter up to have this particular file name and directory structure. So we set up our file name. We also need to go ahead and set up our lights ready for the diffuse pass. So we've specified our lights as bleachers top. So we'd jump over into Houdini and we'd find our bleachers top light. So we'd jump and we'd know that our lights are going to exist in /obj. So we go /obj / and we'd find the bleachers top light, which is here. So we'd grab that node, and on this node we'd change parameters on this node, and we're dealing with a diffuse pass. And we said earlier that when we have a diffuse pass, we need to make sure that diffuse is enabled, specular is disabled, and shadows are disabled. So we'll come in, we'll make sure diffuse is enabled, we'll make sure specular is disabled, and we'll make sure that shadows are disabled. But you'll notice if we disable shadows, we're now going to lose our depth map shadows if we were to come in and render a shadow pass. So what we're actually going to do is remember what we've got set originally. So we're going to remember that diffuse was turned on, that specular was turned off, and that we were set to depth map shadows. We're then going to go in and make all these changes. So we turn on diffuse, turn off specular, even though that's actually not making any difference. And we set our shadows to no shadows. And then we'd go ahead and do our render because we now set up our light for the diffuse pass. We've got our file name, we've got everything set up. So we go ahead and do our render. Once our render has completed, we then go and set these back to whatever we'd remembered them being set to so that the next pass comes in and the light has actually been unaffected. So we'd set these to be ready for our diffuse pass. With that, we've set up our name, we've set up which objects we want, we've set up which pass we want, we've got our start and end frames set up, and we've got our camera specified. The render script will then go ahead and effectively click on the big render button for our node.
Can you render out a single frame?
I can, but I'd need to create the folders that we're rendering into.
Oh yeah, that's a good point.
Let me just create it directly into the TD Volume 2 folder, and the script isn't actually going to delete out those, but let's say we don't want Stadium either in there. Great, and let's just render out frame 1. So the script will effectively click on the big render button. That will cause it to render, and then we could jump in and hunt down that particular file. So that was in C, projects TD volume 2 underscore 2, and it's rendered out now, that file. Now obviously with our directory structure in place created by our script, that file would have actually been placed in a /renders folder, /shot1 folder, and then /stadium folder, and then we'd have our stadium underscore bleachers top diffuse. We can load this up, we can come up, grab mplay, load disk files, and we can open up this file that we've just rendered. We see we've got our top-down light for our stadium. We only have our stadium in this view, we don't see our audience, and we've only got our top-down light in this view. We don't see any other lights, and that's because of the fact that we've specified candidate objects and candidate lights using our script. You also notice if we had shadows here, we're no longer seeing shadows because we disabled shadows, and even though we weren't enabling specular lighting on this particular light, had we had specular lighting enabled, we'd only be seeing diffuse because our script goes in and makes all of those changes. So once the script has made those changes, it would jump back and make sure to set this back to whatever the light was set to after rendering out. You also notice we've got some depth match settings that we changed, and they remain. Even when we switch over to no shadows, the great thing is these parameters don't get changed back to default values, they remain, they're just not taken into account, they're not used. So we don't have to worry about saving all of our shadow settings, we just have to worry about saving the shadow type. If we then switch back to the previous shadow type that we had, all of our settings come back, so it's a really nice and easy system for turning on and off shadows. So with that, that would be that render complete. We then hit the new render and we continue on. So we'd see, okay, we're dealing with a new render. We don't change any of our global settings because we do that the once. But now we're going to specify objects. So objects is equal to stadium import. So we'd be over, still on that render node that we've got remembering in our head. And we set our candidate objects to stadium import. It doesn't matter that this is already set to stadium import. We'd go ahead and we'd replace whatever is set in there to stadium import. We then drop down and we see that our O name is stadium, so we'll remember that in our head, replacing out what we were remembering for O name previously. And then light, that's equal to bleachers bounce. So we come into our candidate lights and we'd replace out whatever's in there with bleachers bounce. And then we drop down and we see L name, bleachers bounce. So now we remember that as our light nickname in our head and we ignore whatever we had in our head previously. We finally come down and we see we're dealing with a diffuse pass. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to remember that we're doing a diffuse pass, and then we come down and just pretend, for sake of argument, that we now hit another new render command because we've finished this render, we know we've finished this render, and we're now going to kick off that render. So what's the first thing we need to do? The first thing we need to do is construct our file name. So we're going to take the base name that hasn't changed from before, and we're still remembering it from before. So we're still remembering our base name from here. So let's take that. So that would be C /projects /td volume 2 /renders. We're still remembering our shot name from before, so we get /shot01. Now we've got our O name that we're remembering for this new render, so we put that in there as a folder, so stadium. / our O name again, stadium. Underscore our light name that we're remembering, our nickname for our light that we're remembering for this particular render, so underscore bleachers bounce. underscore, and the path that we're rendering for this particular render, diffuse dot $f3.pic. So we construct our file name, and then we go ahead and put that file name into our render node. Again, we make sure that if these folders don't exist, we create them, and once they're created, we then jump over and enter this into our render node. So we'd go over and we'd come up to the output picture parameter, and we replace this out, all of this out, doesn't matter what was in there before, with, I'm just not going to type it again because it's already there. We'd replace it with C, /projects, /TD vol2, /stadium. Let's delete out everything from our previous test render. So /stadium as our object name. We then get, actually we would have /renders, then /shot1, then /stadium. There we go. So TD vol2, /renders, /shot1, /stadium, then our /stadium underscore bleachers bounce underscore diffuse. So /stadium underscore bleachers bounce underscore diffuse dot $f3.pic. It would go ahead and set that. It would then go ahead and set up our light parameters for a diffuse pass. So we need to hunt down the /obj/bleachers bounce light. So we go over to obj and grab the bleachers bounce light. And we say, okay, we're rendering a diffuse pass, so we need to make sure that diffuse is enabled, specular is disabled, and shadows are disabled. But what we do, as before, we'd remember whatever we had set previously. We go ahead and make those changes. Once those changes have been made, we can go ahead and fire off our render. So we'd come over to our render node and we'd effectively click on the big render button. I am going to modify our name just so that we can actually render this file out. Of course, recalling that these would still be set to our complete frame range as well because we wouldn't have modified these. So I'm just going to remove out the renders folder and shot1 and stadium, so that we just get a file. So we'd effectively tell the render node to render by clicking on the big render button, and that will render out a file which, if we jump over, we've now got our bleachers bounce diffuse file which we can load up and take a look at. So bleachers bounce. So now we got the bounce light for our bleachers, but once the render had completed, we'd then switch back over, grab our light node again, and we'd reset all these settings to whatever we'd remembered. In this case, diffuse was checked, specular was unchecked, and shadows were off, so we'd reset these, and everything would be ready to then, if we had another render specified, we'd fire off another render. In this case, we've come to the end of our file, so then we'd know that our rendering is completed, the script would terminate, and everything would be finalized.
Excellent. So hopefully those that are watching this video right now can see the pattern that is coming about. So since there is a very predictable pattern to the way this needs to be done, we can put a script in to do it for us. Otherwise, it would be quite a bit of work.
Yeah, it really would. I mean, you can imagine that here we've only got those two passes, and it's already taken us a lot longer than simply specifying new render, objects, oname, lights, lname, and pass to actually go in and manually do those things. Imagine if you had 30, 40, 50, 60 passes that you wanted to do. If you were writing out a description file, it's going to take you 5-10 minutes to do. If you're going in and doing it manually, it's going to take you hours to do. It becomes very tedious, and by the end of the day, you would probably want to hit your head into the desk a few times. So, yeah, this script is really going to make life a lot easier.
Excellent. So I do believe that's everything we set out to do in this video. So now that everybody should have a very clear idea of what it is the script needs to do, let's go ahead and start talking in the next video a bit about Python and scripting with Python for for Maya, for Houdini. So with that,
Maya does have Python now.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
It's a lot of languages, or excuse me, a lot of 3D applications are now starting to support Python.
It's a nice scripting language.
It really is. So with that, we're going to jump into the next video where we will begin discussing Python. Thanks a lot.